Chapter 7.
I know he's not dead. Harry, once more, finds himself pacing in his friend's kitchen. Ron, sitting at the table with a hot chocolate, raises an eyebrow and looks at Hermione. Hermione, however, seems to be frowning into her cup of tea. "I don't know, Harry," Ron says at last. Sounds like a ghost." "He's not a ghost, because he's not dead," Harry retorts. Ron doesn't say anything for a long moment. Then he says quietly, "Are you sure?" "I know he's not." "No, or think." Harry wants to snap at Ron, tell him he doesn't understand, but he recognizes how Ron thinks. It's something their Auror training hammered into them. Decisions should be evidence-based, made with logic and reasoning. Not intuition and "I just know." However, help comes from unexpected quarters. "This sounds familiar," Hermione says quietly, and Harry's attention snaps to her. "Familiar how?" he says urgently. "This has happened before? There's been other cases?" Hermione bites her lip. "Remember when you told me about your dreams a while ago? And it reminded me of those dreams you used to have, the ones that weren't really dreams, they were legilimency." Ron looks up sharply. "What, when you know who used to invade Harry's mind?" "Not quite like that," Hermione says quickly. "But could it be legilimency?" "A skilled legilimens could cast the spell across great distance." "No," Harry says at once. "It's nowhere near the same. Legilimency isn't as simple as that, Harry. It depends on the caster. Every legilimens has a different approach, a different style." Malfoy is reading Harry's mind? Ron looks as if he's not quite sure whether he should be alarmed or not. "It's not about reading minds. Honestly, both of you should really know better. Especially you, Harry. Haven't you been trained in the art of it?" "Yes," Harry admits, feeling slightly defensive. "But I hate it. You try shoving your way into someone's mind. Anyway, legilimency can do a lot of things, but it can't make someone appear." Hermione levels him with a look. "No, it can't. But it can construct visions, can't it, Harry?" He stills. The visions Voldemort sent him. The dreams of Sirius in the Department of Mysteries. Hermione, watching his face carefully, nods. An exceptional legilimens can construct visions, hallucinations. Ron stands up abruptly and starts pacing. "I don't like the sound of this. Malfoy is playing mind games with Harry." "He's not," Harry says slowly. "If you had the power to create a hallucination, anything you wanted, why would you choose to have an ordinary conversation with someone? Maybe this is a last resort, his last way of communicating." He thinks of the way Draco vanished at the end of the conversation. That wasn't part of the vision, he's sure of it. Draco broke an apparent rule when he tried to tell Harry his whereabouts, and suffered the consequences accordingly. "You should be careful though, Harry," Hermione says. "Why?" "Well," she says quietly, "it might not be Malfoy sending you those visions." Harry doesn't like that at all. He clears his throat and decides to try a different lead. "Hermione, what do you know about hindering prosecution?" Hermione straightens up, her eyes immediately brightening. "Well, I've got a number of reference books if you need any." "In her law library," Ron says. "It's not a law library, Ron. It's one shelf. Used to be the Chudley Cannon's memorabilia shelf." "Anyway," Harry says quickly, "hindering prosecution." He pauses, then lowers his voice, although there are no other people in the house. "I think Draco knew his father's whereabouts. Maybe he was even assisting him." "Had a chat to Malfoy's solicitor?" Ron asks shrewdly. His time as an Auror has cultivated a surprising amount of cunning. "Well," Hermione says, "a law used to exist, stating that those who knew the whereabouts of felons, but didn't report them straight away, could be arrested for hindering prosecution. But the law has long since been abolished." "So," Harry says carefully, "Draco disappeared half an hour before his appointment with the solicitor, who would have told him that there would be no legal consequences for him if he turned Lucius over to the authorities." "Maybe he did turn Lucius in," Ron says suddenly. "What?" Remember when we caught Lucius Malfoy? Everyone wanted to be the one to track down the last Death Eater, but in the end, it all came down to an anonymous tip. Harry remembers that. Someone had activated the Salus charm. The spell, specially designed for the Aurors to respond to emergencies, was easy to cast. A simple spray of sparks into the air, and the caster's exact location appeared on the enormous map adhered to the wall of the main Auror office, setting off an alarm that would send all available Aurors rushing to the scene. There wasn't much speculation about who cast it, Ron says. I mean, there was nobody there when we arrived. Just Lucius Malfoy, of course, and nobody else. To be honest, we all assumed Lucius cast it himself in a moment of doubt. Probably got sick of hiding for so long. Course, he probably regretted it the second we all showed up. Lucius died at the scene, didn't he? Hermione says suddenly, and Harry glances at her. Yes, it had been terrible. Aurors were supposed to capture, not kill. Although there had been a royal commission into the death, it was never discovered who, exactly, had cast the fatal curse. Maybe Draco cast the spell and disapparated, Hermione suggests. This doesn't make sense. All signs point to a forced disappearance, Harry says, frustrated. Draco didn't just run away. Why not? He's always running away from things, Ron says, and Harry shakes his head vehemently. He's not like that anymore, he's changed. He wouldn't have run away. You don't understand, you haven't seen the memories. He taps his knuckles impatiently against the table. If he was forcibly taken away, it doesn't make sense that he'd just show up a few months later with Lucius Malfoy, have him arrested, then disapparate again. And it wouldn't explain why he's still missing now. Harry pauses, aware of Hermione and Ron both observing him carefully. Maybe Ron says, you should take a bit of a break, Harry. Harry opens his mouth to protest, spots Hermione narrowing her eyes at him, and quickly changes tack. All right, he says instead. I'm going away for the weekend, anyway. Oh, that's nice, Ron says, looking relieved. Bit of a holiday then? Celebrating my full license. Thought I'd go see a bit of coast somewhere. Brighton in December, eh? Sounds awful, Ron laughs. Oh, Harry, you didn't say you got your license. Congratulations. Hermione looks genuinely delighted. Wonderful news. Let's have a toast to Muggle transport, shall we? And for a few brief hours, Harry doesn't think about work. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. That night, however, after he's returned to the apartment and kissed Ginny goodnight, he sits at the kitchen counter and unpacks Draco's life again. The textbooks, the notebook. He reads the same lines over and over. Do you remember when we were 11? Every now and again, he looks up, but there's no sign of Draco. Maybe he dreamed it last time. Maybe Hermione's right about her legitimacy theory, but maybe she's not. Maybe he's slowly going mad, constructing illusions, trying to conjure something that doesn't exist. Someone who doesn't exist. Harry stares unseeingly at the possessions before him. After a long moment, he reaches for the bottle of aged whiskey. No doubt Draco had been saving it for a special occasion. Harry stands and fetches a glass, uncapping the bottle of whiskey and pouring himself a neat dram. The label, tinted in the colors of a fading autumn, shows a man walking down a long road. Maybe Draco really did just leave. Maybe he's driving somewhere right now, driving down those long highways. Harry takes a long sip of the whiskey, savoring the sweet honeyed taste. No, this is what happened last time. Second-guessing himself, dismissing the dreams and memories, and believing Draco had committed suicide. No, he'd said almost angrily to Hermione when she'd suggested it. No, he wouldn't do that. And yet he'd nearly convinced himself. He glances up hopefully. He feels like he's being watched. But the room is empty. Well, perhaps Draco is still here. Just invisible, beyond human touch. I'm going away, Harry says to the silent room. To Helston. I want to see what you saw. I'll stand on the edge of world and the winds will blow southerly. The room remains empty, and when Harry goes to sleep, he dreams of wild waves and crumbling cliffs. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. On Thursday, he visits Narcissa Malfoy. She receives Harry with an air of faint bewilderment. "I received your owl," she says, and Harry's forced to decline the offer of tea. A house elf lingers hopefully in the background, carrying a full tea service. Perhaps Narcissa catches the impatience in his eyes, in his restless hands, for she shakes her head slightly and takes him straight to the stables. "I will never understand," she says, "the obsession with Muggle inventions. Rather uncouth, I think." "Is that what you told Draco?" Harry asks, wasting no time in going over to the Renault Megane and pulling the cover away. It feels like greeting an old friend. He smiles faintly and runs a hand across the polished metal. "You have the same expression as Draco did every time he looked at that terrible waste of money," Narcissa observes. Harry doesn't respond. He accepts the plastic keycard from Narcissa and the car unlocks itself. Muggle technology is amazing, Harry thinks. Waste of money, indeed. No doubt Draco considered it one of his finest investments. Harry wishes he could fix the car himself. It seems important, somehow, that he's the one to fix it all. But when he started going through the list with Matthew, it became apparent that the car needed a lot more than a new battery. Brakes, calipers, discs, cylinders, pads, steering joints, and track rods. Everything would need to be checked and possibly replaced, depending on how well Draco had kept his car and how it had been treated after his disappearance. Then the petrol would need to be properly drained. The engine would need to be flushed. Harry had conceded defeat and old Narcissa, asking permission to fix the car and, once he received an affirmative, had booked the car for a mechanic. "I suppose you're wondering why I want to fix it," Harry says, needing a little bit of courage to say it. He'd been hoping Narcissa wouldn't ask, and she hasn't so far, but he's certain she wants to know. But to his surprise, she shakes her head. "Astoria says you received your car license. Much like an apparition license, I suppose." She doesn't look at Harry. Instead, she stares at the car. "You want to drive it? And I think Draco would like to see it driven again." She glances at Harry. "Sometimes, it seems you genuinely want to find my son." "I do." Narcissa pauses for a long moment. Harry's Auror training begins to prickle at his skin like a long-forgotten high summer heat. She knows something. "Do you have a memory you want to give me?" he asks quietly, careful to sound calm. Narcissa lifts a hand to her necklace, a troubled expression on her face. "It's nothing," she says at last, and Harry exhales slowly to hide his frustration. There's no point pressing, she'll only retreat now. "The mechanics will be arriving in a few minutes," he says, changing the topic. This is one point Narcissa had not agreed with. She'd refused to allow the car to be towed away. She seemed to regard it as far too undignified. Harry has the feeling that she'll soon realize the other option, a couple of mechanics wandering about Malfoy Manor, is far more undignified. Harry suddenly has a pang of mistrust. "There's no house elves wandering about, is there?" he asks suspiciously, and Narcissa gives him a long, cool look. "These muggles," she says, "will not be anywhere near the manor. They will be here. That's why I requested your presence. You can deal with them." Harry bites back an angry retort. He didn't realize he'd been invited here solely to act as some sort of Muggle interpreter. "Right," he says, then, because he's still feeling slightly resentful, he adds, "It'll cost a lot, particularly this time of year." Money is not an obstacle. It never was for you, was it? But there's the sound of a car in the distance and Narcissa gracefully retreats, leaving Harry to deal with the mechanics. He leaves shortly after greeting them and directing them to the car anyway. He can't stand to see strangers pulling apart Draco's car. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The sun is setting against the dark winter sky when Harry returns to the stables to check progress. The mechanics seem slightly peeved but cheer up considerably when Harry, following advised protocol from Matthew, pays them generously, hands over a case of beer, and wishes them Merry Christmas. You too, mate, one of the mechanics says. Does it start up now? Harry asks, looking over the car, and the mechanic grins. Car yours, is it? Can tell by the look on your face. He nods towards the car. Go on, then. Harry opens the driver's side door and gets in. Now that he's driven a car, he reacts automatically, his hands instinctively reaching to rest on the steering wheel, his feet finding the brake and accelerator, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. He presses the ignition button. The car responds immediately, the low thrum of the engine filling the room. For a long moment, Harry grips the steering wheel tightly and can't trust himself to speak. He doesn't know why, but this moment is heavy with something intangible. This is real. Engine might be a little rough at first, the nearest mechanic says, but it'll be all right with a bit of time. Harry is loath to turn the car off, but he presses the button again and listens to the engine die again. Right, he says. Thanks. The mechanics don't take long to pack up and leave. Harry sits in the driver's seat, feeling the memories rush through him like rain. We could go anywhere. Anywhere? Anywhere. A footstep. Harry opens his eyes. He hadn't realized he'd closed them. The mechanics are long gone. Narcissa stands in the doorway of the tack room, observing him silently. It is fixed, she asks. Harry smiles and presses the ignition button. He'll never get tired to listening to that engine start up. But the noise seems to bring little comfort to Narcissa. Her mouth trembles slightly and her head bows slightly, as if her sorrow is a physical weight. It is strange, she says, every word stiff with forced composure, to hear that noise after all this time. She lifts her wand and waves it at the southern wall. It disappears completely and Harry frowns, not understanding until Narcissa looks at him again. You wanted to drive it, she says, and Harry feels a jolt run through him. He takes a deep breath. If he crashes Draco's car, Narcissa would never forgive him. Harry wouldn't forgive himself either. So he carefully adjusts the seat. Draco's just a little taller than him, it seems, and adjusts all the mirrors. He puts the seatbelt on, acutely aware that he's doing the same movements Draco has done hundreds of times before. He releases the handbrake, shifts the gear into drive, and lightly presses the accelerator. The car rolls forward, finally leaving its prison of the past 3 years, finally doing what it was built to do: move. There's the quiet crunch of gravel beneath the tires. He turns slowly along the wide path until it sweeps around the manor and joins the wide driveway. In the rear vision mirror, he can see Narcissa watching him. How many times did she watch her son drive away, disappearing into the distance? He applies just a little more acceleration. The car quickens its pace down the long driveway and then, finally, he slows slightly to turn onto the open road. It's a thin and winding country road. The same type of road on which Harry spent so many hours practicing his own driving. He turns onto the road and accelerates until the scenery is flying past, until the dark fields wash away like tides, until it feels like he's driving through the night sky itself, and 1,000 moments seem to come together in one rush of exhilaration. Draco and Astoria driving by the river, Harry standing in his apartment and watching the train lights disappear into darkness, and for a moment he sees everything perfectly. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. It's a 2-hour drive to London, but Harry pulls over just 20 minutes later, in Salisbury, to check the route. When he looks up from the road atlas again, Draco's there. He's sitting in the passenger seat and gazing out the window, forehead pressed against the glass. Harry wonders if he's been there the whole time, and he studies Draco's face. Is he unhappy that Harry is driving his car? Does he hate seeing someone else in the driver's seat? Draco's gaze suddenly refocuses and Harry realizes that Draco's staring at him in the reflection of the window. Watching Harry watching him. It's like a circle. Then Draco smiles. It's a crashing relief to Harry, who remembers only too well the agony on Draco's face when he last vanished. I'm sorry, Harry wants to say. I won't ask questions, I promise. I won't make you disappear again. We could go anywhere, Harry says instead, his voice quiet. Draco turns away from the window, then, and looks at Harry. Anywhere? Anywhere. Harry studies Draco. You look tired. Draco glances away. It's hard, trying to do this. Do what? Come back. For the first time, Harry realizes that for Draco to make himself real like this, to appear to Harry, to manipulate visions of reality, he must have to invest a great deal of energy and perhaps magic. He wonders if that's the reason why Draco didn't appear again for nearly a week after the incident at the apartment. Perhaps it had taken Draco that long to simply recover and gather the energy to try again. Is this legitimacy? Harry asks, changing the subject. He won't ask Draco where he is. That sort of question clearly extracts a price. In a manner of speaking. What's that supposed to mean? Harry's completely bewildered. Draco studies him for a long moment. You know, he says at last, when I first realized you, of all people, were managing this case, I was angry. He pauses and glances out the window again, staring at his reflection. My last chance, and it was wasted on you. Thanks a lot. You're impulsive, you never stop to think about things, you can't compartmentalize, the worst person for detective work. Harry opens his mouth, thinks for a moment, then shuts it again. Draco looks at him. And look how you've changed, he says. Is it just me, or did you just pause to actually think about what you were about to say? I'm still impulsive. Well, over the course of my observations, I've decided that your impulsivity is not necessarily a negative quality. Was that a compliment? It was an observation. And Merlin, it feels so close to being perfect. They're sitting here, bickering like they used to be, but there's a faint familiarity that was never there before, and Harry just wants to stay here for a little while longer. Just a little while, until he can forget everything else in his life. Does it take a lot of effort to stay here? Harry asks, wondering if Draco will suddenly vanish again. Are you going to leave again? A car passes them, headlights ghosting across the Renault Megane, illuminating Draco for a moment. Then the car continues on and they are cast into darkness once more. Coming home is hard. Going away is easy, Draco says. I suppose we have something in common then. Harry hesitates, thinking he shouldn't be sharing something like this with Draco when he hasn't even told Ron or Hermione, but most of the time, I don't want to go home, Harry says at last. I don't even know where home is really. Draco studies him. I suppose we do have something in common, then, he says after a long moment. They lapse into a natural silence. Harry starts the car again, his route decided, and merges onto the road. He hopes Draco will stay there, just watching the world pass by, but after a few minutes Draco speaks again. I have to leave. Are you in danger? Harry can't keep the worry from his voice. Draco shakes his head. Too tired. I can't focus anymore. Oh! Harry suddenly remembers another question. Listen, if this is legitimacy, is it you doing it, or someone else? Is someone there with you? Draco pauses. I'm alone, he says. Then he hesitates again. The air seems to shimmer around him and his body tenses. Harry realizes what's about to happen and shakes his head. Don't, he says urgently, braking hard and pulling onto the shoulder of the road. Don't do it, it's not worth it, stop. In Incepto Finus Est, Draco says, the words lashing through the air like electricity, and his final words are choked out in a fit of obvious agony. My father. And the rest is lost in a strangled cry before he vanishes with another sound like glass shattering. Harry sits for a long moment, listening to the engine idle, waiting for his hands to steady again. How long will it take Draco to recover this time? What price is he paying right now? An impossibly high price, it seems, for 6 little words. By the time he arrives in London and parks the car in the apartment block's garage, it's past 10 o'clock and Ginny will be asleep. He walks slowly to the apartment, his body feeling heavy and his mind weary. He doesn't want to deal with anyone or anything. Coming home is hard. Going away is easy. Draco Malfoy knows him better than Harry knows himself. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Friday is the day that Harry tells Ginny he's never coming home. The evening starts beautifully. It's the week before Christmas, and the streets are resplendent with their festive displays and twinkling lights. Couples are holding hands as they skate around the Tower ice rink. Carolers sing beneath the Christmas tree in Trafalgar Square. In Diagon Alley, the shops are open late to accommodate holiday shoppers. As they hurry past quality Quidditch supplies, Harry glances at the sign in the window. Buy the latest sky blazer and make it home for Christmas. He remembers reading this same sign in the first week of December, and it feels like a lifetime ago. The restaurant itself is a small and cheerful establishment with a fire crackling merrily and wreaths of holly twined around the windows. It reminds Harry of the Three Broomsticks. They're ushered to a discreet corner where Harry won't be bothered with stares and Ginny won't be badgered by ardent Quidditch fans. Harry orders a spiced mead and Ginny spends some time perusing a list of festive cocktails before she orders something called a peppermint dragon. Harry, she says, just after the waitress has disappeared, they'll be doing the big announcement next week, so I wanted to make sure you knew first. But I had to wait for everything to be properly confirmed, of course. You've been made captain? Harry says with surprise. Ginny's always had a lot of ambition, but Gwen loves her job and has no plans to resign, as far as Harry knows. Better, Ginny says, her eyes bright with excitement. Harry, I've done it. I've made the English national team. Harry sits back. That's really, congratulations, Ginny. This is amazing, Ginny says. I'm on the reserves, of course, but it's generally a stepping stone to a full-time position. I know one of their chasers is heading into early retirement from a bad back injury, and I've been told that if I prove myself in practice, I have a legitimate chance at filling the position. The waitress arrives with a spiced mead and a cocktail the color of a candy cane. Harry sips at the mead if only to have something to do. The good thing is, we don't have to move, Ginny says. We're perfectly located for international travel. Of course, a bit closer to central London would be nice, but we'll see what happens. I'll have to travel a lot more, of course, but it's a necessary part of joining the team. Maybe, a few months ago, Harry would have nodded and smiled and convinced himself he was happy, or at least that it was selfish to be unhappy. But his conversation with Draco circles his mind like a flurry of snow. Most of the time, I don't want to go home. It was the most truthful thing he'd said for a long time. The apartment isn't home. He's never called it home. And he never will. And then, the second realization rolls in like thunder when Ginny smiles and asks Harry what his big announcement is. I learned to drive, he says. Did you really? That sounds fun. You'll have to take me for a drive sometime. And Harry opens his mouth to say I learned to drive from Matthew Venn, because then the whole story can unravel. Matthew, who's married to Astoria. Astoria, who Harry met through working Draco's case and speaking to Narcissa. Narcissa, who gave Harry the Renault Megane, which is right now parked at their apartment. The Renault Megane, which is so important because Draco loved to drive it everywhere. Draco, who appears in memories to help Harry, who has observed him for months, who's changed his mind about Harry in the same way Harry changed his mind about Draco. Draco, who once said, what's the point in that? Sitting in a box, only going where someone else takes you, and Harry can't let go of that because every time he hears Ginny call the apartment a box in the sky he experiences a crippling sense of loss and self-doubt. Draco, whose absence Harry can't stop thinking about, and isn't it funny that Draco is never physically there, but it always feels like he's there mentally, but for Ginny it's the other way round? Or maybe it's not funny, maybe it's just depressing and makes Harry feel like going back to the Renault Megane and driving, until Draco comes back again, and then everything will be all right. But Harry doesn't say any of that. He smiles instead, and nods his way through dinner, and waits until they've Auror home. And just as they're standing in the bedroom, with Ginny folding her robes and Harry sitting on the edge of the bed, He says, I didn't even notice. Notice what? Ginny asks, pausing in her folding. Our relationship ending. Ginny goes very quiet then. Harry waits. It seems like the sum of their relationship these days. Silence. Then Ginny says, neither did I. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. That night, they lay on the bed together. Harry holds her one last time. Are you happy? He asks her. She's silent for a long time. I don't know. Are you? No, Harry says truthfully. I didn't even notice, Ginny says, and he catches the sadness in her voice and holds her tighter. It's all right. I should have noticed. It's all right, Harry repeats. In the morning, he wakes up alone. Ginny's gone to Quidditch practice.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this chapter, please hit the subscribe button and ring the bell to stay updated with more audiobooks. Happy listening!